Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a location that most people today know by its modern titles, the Steel City of South India or the Denim City, thanks to its massive modern industries. But actually, we're going to bypass all of that today. We're zooming way back through time to look at Ballari not as an industrial powerhouse, but as a 5,000-year-old geopolitical chessboard. This is a region defined by this really unique, undulating landscape of monolithic granite hills, and for centuries, those very hills made it literally one of the most fiercely contested military prizes in the entire Indian subcontinent.
We are talking about the Mauryas, the Nolambas, the Vijayanagara Empire, the Bijapur Sultanate, the Marathas, the Mughals, the Kingdom of Mysore, and finally the British Empire. Over half dozen massive imperial powers all spilling blood to control one imposing terrain feature, Ballari Gudda, a 1,976-foot granite rock. So why? Well, you know what they say, geography is destiny, and whoever held this particular rock essentially controlled the vast, sweeping plains of the Deccan Plateau.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our chronological roadmap for today. We'll start with, number 1, early frontiers and buffer states. Then, 2, rise of Hyundai Hanumappa Nayaka. 3, the post-Vijayanagara power struggle. 4, Hyder Ali and the French blunder. And finally, 5, British conquest and demilitarization.
Starting off with Section 1, Early Frontiers and Buffer States, from Mauryan edicts to Nalamba battles. Now, what's absolutely incredible here is how these rare edicts prove Ballari's importance over 2 millennia ago. The Mauryan Emperor Ashoka left rock edicts all over the Indian subcontinent back in the 3rd century BCE, but in almost all of them he used honorific titles like Devanampiya, which means beloved of the gods. However, in a highly restricted subset of edicts found right here in Ballari, specifically the Nittur and Udagolam edicts, his actual personal name, Ashoka, is carved directly into the stone. It's like a VIP signature. These rare edicts gave direct administrative orders to local officers, proving that Ballari wasn't just some forgotten outpost, right? It was a heavily administrative, strategically vital southern frontier for the massive Mauryan Empire.
Fast forward a bit to the 8th and 9th centuries, and geography kinda cursed Ballari to become a permanent buffer zone. It was incorporated into a province known as Nolambabade D 32,000. The local rulers, the Nalamba dynasty, were constantly squeezed between the imperial ambitions of the Rashtrakutas and Gangas up to the north and west, and the Cholas down to the south. This geographical positioning meant Ballari was a constant prize in continuous ancient turf wars. Talk about being stuck in the middle. And this really set the stage for the massive fortifications that would eventually define the whole region.
Which brings us to Section 2, Rise of Hyundai Hanumappa Nayaka, the architect of Ballari Fort. All right, this brings us to one of the most dramatic, character-driven moments in our explainer today. Hyundai Hanumappa Nayaka initially served the Adil Shahi Sultanate of Bijapur. And according to historical chronicles, the Sultan saw Nayaka's 5 incredibly capable sons and demanded one of them for conversion to Islam. Well, Nayaka defiantly refused, and he famously clapped back at the Sultan with this line, "Hand over one of your wives to me, and I shall give you sons like mine." Literally facing immediate arrest for this incredible defiance, he and his sons executed a daring escape across the Krishna River. They defected to the rival Vijayanagara Empire, where his military genius very quickly earned him vast territories, and yep, that included Ballari. So to secure this new territory, Nayaka built an absolute marvel of military engineering, the Upper Fort. He engineered a citadel right on top of that 1,976-foot granite outcrop, and he used something called Cyclopean masonry. Basically, this means he used massive stones fitted perfectly together like a giant puzzle, without any mortar. It made the walls incredibly durable and highly earthquake-resistant. But obviously, you can't survive a long siege without water, especially in a semi-arid climate. So he oversaw the excavation of 7 massive rock-cut stepwells right up there to secure water for his garrison. He affectionately named them after his sisters, so they're collectively known as the Sisters' Stepwells. It's just brilliant how this arid, monolithic rock was transformed into something highly habitable and completely impregnable.
Moving right along to Section 3, the post-Vijayanagara power struggle, the chaos of the Deccan.
Okay. The century following the fall of the Vijayanagara Empire was an insane, rapid-fire tug-of-war for this fortress. And this timeline brilliantly illustrates that. Once the Vijayanagara Empire violently collapsed at the Battle of Talikota in 1565, the region descended into absolute chaos, and this fort became the ultimate prize. In 1678, the Maratha ruler Chhatrapati Shivaji marched in and captured it. Then, just a few years later in 1685, Aurangzeb's expanding Mughal empire absorbed it. As Mughal authority eventually fractured, the fort became a tributary to the Nizam of Hyderabad in 1724. Just a dizzying, chaotic carousel of empires, all fighting desperately for the strategic high ground that Nayaka had originally fortified.
Let's move to Section 4. Hyder Ali and the French Blunder, a fatal miscalculation in military architecture.
So, in 1769, the formidable ruler of Mysore, Hyder Ali, seizes the fort. He realizes the old upper fort was pretty outdated against modern 18th century artillery, so he commissions a French engineer to build a massive new lower fort. And the French engineer builds this really impressive structure, complete with an 18-foot deep moat. Sounds great, right? Well, there was just one colossal architectural failure. He completely failed to account for Kumbharaguda. That's a neighboring hill right next door, meaning any enemy force could simply walk up Kumbharaguda and fire their cannons effortlessly down into this brand new, highly expensive fort. Hyder Ali was, as you can imagine, absolutely furious at this catastrophic oversight and reportedly had the French engineer executed. To this day, you can actually see the grave of the unknown French engineer sitting at the east gate of the fort.
And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, British Conquest and Demilitarization, the Bureaucratic Pacification. By 1800, the British East India Company takes over the region, and the dynamic completely shifts from imperial warfare to methodical, bureaucratic pacification. To understand this, we need to look at this staggering number, 30,000. When British administrator Major Thomas Monro arrived in 1800, he found a region completely devastated by warfare. The revenue was controlled by about 80 local warlords, who were known as polygars, and between them they commanded a private, unchecked army of 30,000 soldiers. So, Monro's immediate priority was to systematically disarm and dismantle these private armies to establish total colonial control.
So how did he do it? To secure this control, Monro fundamentally restructured the local economy. He outright rejected the zamindari system that was being used over in Bengal, which empowered local landlords, and instead introduced the ryotwari system. This assessed revenue directly on the individual farmer, completely cutting out those warlords. And it worked. It successfully broke the power of the local military elites. But it had a paradoxical, devastating effect on the ground. The colonial state demanded these high taxes strictly in cash. This forced traditional peasants into the hands of moneylenders, drove them deep into debt, and pushed the region away from traditional food crops into cash crops like cotton, just so the farmers could survive.
As we move into the 20th century, the British entirely repurposed Ballari's massive military infrastructure. With the warlords gone and the region pacified, they turned the area into a carceral state. The very fort built to keep empires out was converted into a massive colonial prison. They established the Alipuram camp jail, jamming over 4,500 political prisoners into facilities designed for a fraction of that number. During the independence movement, it held absolute giants of Indian nationalism, leaders like Rajahaji, Kamaraj, and Periyar, alongside fiercely dedicated local heroes like Thikar Subramanya and Ballari Siddhama, who endured brutal whippings and hard labor within its walls.
Which leaves us with this final, profound question to think about. How did a fortress built for centuries of imperial warfare become a catalyst for India's fight for freedom? We've traced this single granite hill from the Mauryan frontier through the architectural brilliance of the Nayakas, the chaotic wars of the Mughals and Marathas, right down to the British colonial prisons. It is incredible to see how a landscape designed entirely for warfare and subjugation ultimately became an ideological forge, a crucible where leaders were locked away, only to emerge and help build a free, modern republic. Ballari's history is a continuous, unbroken 5,000-year thread, and its quiet granite hills have witnessed the rise and fall of almost every major power in the subcontinent's history. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope you leave with a newfound fascination for the layered, turbulent history etched into the very rocks of Ballari.